NASA on alert, 7 comets are diving in. 3i Atlas has new company. For the first time in recorded history, 7 mysterious comets are diving toward our solar system, moving in impossible harmony, pulsing with faint signals and defying everything scientists know. Among them, the interstellar enigma 3i Atlas hints at a pattern that could rewrite our understanding of the cosmos. What is coming through our skies? The unexpected alert it began as a flicker on a monitor deep within NASA's near-Earth object surveillance grid, the kind of minor anomaly that technicians see a dozen times a week. A cluster of signals, faint but persistent, blinked across multiple observation nodes. At first, no one paid much attention. Glitches were routine. Cosmic rays could fake a return, sensor noise could mimic movement. But as the data streamed in, the pattern refused to fade. The signals were stable, moving, and converging inward. Within minutes, algorithms designed to flag potentially hazardous objects began to light up the console with warning codes. The timestamps aligned too perfectly to dismiss. Somewhere beyond the orbit of Neptune, 7 separate bodies, all traveling at extraordinary velocities, had entered the system's detection threshold. The statistical odds of such an event occurring naturally were beyond astronomical. In the dim control room, analysts leaned closer to their screens. The first assumption was a system malfunction, a calibration error, or perhaps a reflection from a passing satellite. But cross-checks from independent observatories in Chile, Hawaii, and Australia reported the same thing. 7 new inbound signatures, each tracing a unique but coordinated trajectory toward the inner solar system. The room grew quiet. There was something eerie about the symmetry of it, the way the signals seemed to arrive together as if on cue. The software displayed their predicted paths, thin white lines converging like arrows through the solar plane. For seasoned astronomers, the sight was disquieting. Comets rarely travel in flocks. They are loners by nature, drifters scattered across billions of miles. But here, against all expectation, 7 were coming at once. A low murmur spread among the team as initial data from infrared and radar arrays confirmed the objects were icy, cometary in composition, but unusually dense and fast. The term coincidence vanished from conversation. Analysts began rerunning simulations, feeding in gravitational models, solar perturbations, orbital decay estimates, yet every version of the math ended the same way. The trajectories were real, and they were inbound. By the time the official alert reached mission control, tension had replaced curiosity. Someone whispered what everyone else was thinking, that maybe these weren't ordinary comets at all. And for the first time in years, NASA's monitoring division shifted from routine observation to full-scale alert. Something unprecedented was entering the solar system, and it was coming straight for us. The pattern that shouldn't exist in the days that followed the alert. NASA's data servers pulsed with relentless calculations. Supercomputers mapped the trajectories of the 7 inbound comets, converting lines of raw telemetry into glowing threads of light that curved and twisted across the solar grid. At first glance, the orbits appeared chaotic, random scatter just as one would expect from bodies cast loose from deep space. But the longer the models ran, the more the chaos began to resolve into something disturbingly elegant. Astrophysicists tracing the vectors began to notice alignments that shouldn't exist. Each comet's path intersected at precise angular intervals, as if positioned by some hidden symmetry. When the orbital planes were overlaid, they radiated outward like the spokes of a wheel centered on the sun. It wasn't just visually striking, it was mathematically impossible, at least for a natural event. Gravitational perturbations, solar tides, and random ejection mechanics should have scattered them across billions of kilometers. Yet the 7 objects held their geometry as if bound by design. At Caltech's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a senior orbital analyst ran probability models late into the night. The results left him staring at his monitor in disbelief. The odds of 7 unconnected comets arriving in such configuration were less than 1 in 10 trillion. The dataset refused to behave according to known celestial dynamics. When he sent his report to colleagues in Europe, the reply came back terse. Check your equations. This cannot be correct, but it was correct. Independent teams from the European Space Agency, Japan's Subaru telescope, and Chile's Atacama Array confirmed the same strange order. Each trajectory traced back to nearly identical entry vectors, all emerging from a single region of interstellar space, far beyond the Kuiper belt. No known gravitational anomaly or stellar interaction could explain it. It was as if something, or someone, had launched them deliberately. The implications unsettled even the most rational minds. Some whispered that the geometry resembled a signal, a pattern meant to be noticed. Others argued that humanity was seeing coincidence through the lens of fear, mistaking symmetry for intention. But beneath the debates, a quiet certainty took root. Nature doesn't arrange its messengers this way. As the data accumulated, one truth became harder to deny. The universe had just drawn a pattern across the solar system, one so precise, so improbable, that every familiar law of randomness began to crumble beneath its weight. And somewhere in that pattern, scientists sensed a message, not written in words, but in motion itself. The search for meaning. The data had become too strange to ignore. Across observatories and universities, the question shifted from what the comets were doing to why. The world's best astrophysicists, orbital dynamicists, and plasma physicists gathered in virtual conferences that stretched into dawn, a digital agora filled with equations, models, and disbelief. Every proposed explanation unraveled under scrutiny. Every elegant theory fell apart in the face of geometry that refused to behave like chance. The first to take the stage were the realists, those who still believed in chaos. Perhaps, they argued, a binary star system had fractured these comets long ago, sending them on parallel routes that only now intersected with our solar plane. The idea was plausible at a glance, comforting even. Binary systems often scattered debris during gravitational exchanges. It was, in principle, a mechanism that could produce similar trajectories. But when the simulations were run, the numbers refused to align. A disruption powerful enough to eject 7 objects in such precision would also have scattered countless others, leaving a debris field detectable by even modest telescopes. No such field existed. Then came the gravitational shepherding theory, the idea that an unseen mass, perhaps a rogue planet or dark object at the system's edge, had subtly guided the comets inward, carving their orbits with unseen hands. For a moment, this explanation caught fire. If there were indeed a massive object beyond Neptune, something akin to the hypothesized Planet 9, it could conceivably have orchestrated the pattern through long-term resonance. Yet when physicists modeled the forces required, they found the gravitational signatures missing. The sky held no unseen puppeteer. The precision remained unaccounted for. As the scientific possibilities thinned, the conversations turned quiet. In private calls, emails sent under encryption, and late-night gatherings far from press access, a more unsettling phrase began to surface: artificial cause. Not as a declaration, but as a reluctant question. Could the geometry they were observing be the fingerprint of intent? Could these comets have been guided, or even created, for a purpose? No one wanted to say it aloud. The term artificial carried weight. It transformed a cosmic puzzle into a potential paradigm shift. To suggest intelligence was to risk ridicule, to invite the ghosts of past controversies, Tabby's star, the wow. Signal, the decades of false alarms that had turned bold scientists into cautionary tales. And yet this was different. The pattern was not a fleeting flash or a spectral anomaly. It was a structure written across space itself. At NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, a small team ran one last analysis, not on mass or velocity, but on timing. When had the comets crossed into detection range? When did they accelerate? The timestamps aligned with eerie precision, as though a synchronized event had triggered them millions of miles apart. It was the kind of timing seen in engineered systems, not celestial happenstance. Still, the official reports clung to restraint. Publicly, spokespeople emphasized ongoing analysis and unique orbital phenomena. Privately, messages between lead researchers carried an undercurrent of awe and dread. Something in the data suggested purpose, yet the absence of proof left them suspended between science and myth. In the end, meaning became a mirror. Every scientist who looked into it saw their own reflection. Skepticism, wonder, fear. The universe, it seemed, had drawn a perfect pattern and then gone silent, daring humanity to explain it. And in that silence, the question lingered like a low hum through the halls of NASA and the quiet observatories scattered across the world. What if the comets weren't just coming from somewhere? What if they were coming for something? Inside NASA's quiet war room behind closed doors, NASA's headquarters in Washington, D.C. had transformed. The normally sterile conference chambers, bright open spaces of scientific collaboration, were sealed off, their glass walls covered in opaque panels. Keycards no longer granted easy access. Inside, a new command nucleus had taken shape. A multi-agency task force quietly assembled under the codename Project Perihelion. It was no longer just a matter for astronomers. The Department of Defense had moved in, followed by the National Reconnaissance Office and a few faces from intelligence agencies whose presence was never acknowledged. The atmosphere was tense, not hostile, but heavy with unease. This wasn't merely about 7 comets anymore. It was about control of a discovery that could alter the balance of understanding between nations, or perhaps between species. A wall of screens flickered with live data from the world's most sensitive instruments. Radar sweeps from Goldstone, optical feeds from Hubble, and thermal imaging relayed from defense satellites not listed on any public manifest. At the center of the chaos stood a model of the solar system, rendered in real time as arcs of pale light tracing the comet's courses. What unsettled the analysts most wasn't where the objects were, but how they were moving. The trajectories had begun to shift. Not dramatically, but with subtle deviations that no simulation could account for. It was as if one or more of the comets were adjusting course in response to something unseen. Gravitational influences were ruled out. There were no nearby planets, no external perturbations. Yet the telemetry didn't lie. The orbits were alive. Then came the transmission. It was faint, buried deep in the static of the deep space network, a narrow band signal emanating from one of the objects, the one later designated Comet Sigma 3. At first, engineers dismissed it as interference, perhaps a reflection from solar-wind interactions or instrumentation feedback. But the signal persisted, repeating at intervals too regular to be noise, a pulse, soft but precise, like a heartbeat measured in light years. Within hours, the data was encrypted and locked down. Access logs were wiped. Even among those inside the task force, only a handful were permitted to analyze the waveform. What they found made the air in the room seem thinner. The pattern wasn't random. It carried a harmonic structure, repeating ratios that matched no known astrophysical source. The debate fractured the team. Some insisted it was natural, an electromagnetic resonance caused by the comet's rotation or ion tail oscillations. Others argued that no known comet could generate coherent radio frequencies in a vacuum. The suggestion of an artificial signal hovered like a ghost over the table, unspoken but undeniable. One physicist, his voice low but steady, finally broke the silence. If it's not noise and it's not random, then it's talking to something. No one answered. The words hung there, suspended like dust motes in the glow of the monitors. Outside the sealed room, the world remained unaware. Official statements framed the situation as routine tracking of near-solar objects. But inside the war room, the mood had shifted from curiosity to quiet dread. Every time Sigma 3's pulse reached Earth, faint, steady, and impossibly regular, It reminded them that the mystery was no longer theoretical. Something out there was active. And as the comets drew closer to the inner solar system, the question haunting the war room wasn't just what they were, it was when they would arrive and what they might bring with them. When the sky turned strange as the comets edged closer to the inner solar system, the night sky began to change. Telescopes weren't the only instruments picking up their movement anymore. Ordinary eyes could see the icy travelers, faint streaks of light cutting through the darkness. Amateur astronomers crowded online forums, sharing photographs, sketches, and coordinates. Social media erupted with questions, theories, and wild speculation. The public, hungry for spectacle, became an unexpected participant in what had until now been a quiet scientific mystery. Official channels, however, remained almost entirely silent. Press briefings offered vague statements about unusual but non-threatening celestial phenomena and encouraged people to view the objects safely. The contrast between the public's fascination and the authorities' restraint only heightened tension. News outlets ran nightly updates, often exaggerating speed or size, fueling curiosity and anxiety alike. The comets, moving together yet separately, became characters in a story the world hadn't written, and the sky itself seemed to whisper questions no one could answer. Behind the public display, scientists continued their meticulous work. Observatories tracked the brightness of each comet, measuring light curves with precision. At first, the variations seemed random, subtle fluctuations caused by rotation, outgassing, or interactions with the solar wind. But as the data accumulated, a strange pattern emerged. The 7 comets appeared to pulse in faint synchronicity, their peaks and valleys aligning across millions of kilometers. It was as if the bodies were communicating, or at least responding to a shared rhythm in space. Speculation spread quickly among astronomers. Could there be a physical mechanism linking them? Perhaps magnetic fields, sublimation cycles, or gravitational resonance? Every conventional explanation fell short. The synchronicity suggested intelligence, intentionality, or at the very least, something profoundly unexpected. The juxtaposition of ordinary human perception and cosmic mystery added another layer of unease. People looked up at the night sky, pointing and marveling, unaware that these shimmering trails weren't simply comets drifting on predictable paths. Something connected them across the void, invisible yet undeniable. Even the most skeptical observers had to admit the sky had changed. For those inside NASA's war room, the spectacle offered both wonder and dread. The public could see the comets, but no one outside their inner circle knew the faint signals, the shifting trajectories, or the harmony that defied explanation. And as the 7 comets traced their silent arcs through the heavens, scientists and citizens alike felt the same quiet, unshakable question echo through the cosmos. What exactly was coming? The quiet realization, as the last of the 7 comets arced closer to the inner solar system, a hushed clarity settled over the scientific community. Months of observation, modeling, and debate had brought them to an uncomfortable consensus. The trajectories, the synchronization, the faint signals, all pointed toward a design of some kind. Not chaos, not randomness. Something in the heavens had orchestrated their movement, leaving patterns so precise that no natural process alone could account for them, yet intent remained elusive. No message could be decoded, no motive discerned. The comets moved with intelligence in their geometry, but whether they carried purpose, awareness, or communication remained unknowable. Scientists wrestled with the paradox. The evidence was compelling enough to suggest guidance, yet wholly insufficient to conclude agency. Even the faint radio pulses, enigmatic as they were, spoke not of language but of structure, a rhythm that teased the mind without revealing meaning. The realization sparked a quiet awe. In laboratories, conference calls, and dimly lit observatories, astronomers and physicists allowed themselves a rare moment of reflection. The universe, it seemed, had shown its hand just enough to remind humanity of its limits. 7 silent voyagers moved through the solar system, indifferent to politics, technology, and human curiosity, yet communicating something profound simply by existing in perfect, improbable harmony. Outside, the public marveled at streaks of light in the night sky, unaware of the deeper mystery encoded in their paths. Humanity had once believed the cosmos could be fully mapped, fully understood, fully tamed. These comets shattered that illusion. They were both beautiful and terrifying, a reminder that intelligence might exist beyond the bounds of flesh, or that nature itself could create order so astonishing it seemed deliberate. In the end, the 7 comets became a quiet testament. The universe was alive with patterns humans were only beginning to notice, and some phenomena might forever exceed comprehension. Whether natural or engineered, their passage left an indelible mark, a humbling reminder that the cosmos holds mysteries beyond calculation, beyond certainty, and beyond the reach of even the most powerful telescopes. Humanity could watch, measure, and marvel, but the ultimate meaning remained suspended among the stars.